Words of the River Master. When the folk, the common folk that is, lack good faith, the inner power of the Taoist can transform them and cause them to have good faith. The Taoist rules all under heaven quietly with the heart and mind of a fool. The common folk strain their ears and eyes to see and hear the Taoist, who loves them as children, nurturing them and expecting no reward. Be safe out there, guys. Alright, philosophy at the park. Round one. We're dealing with fairness and how to find it. So Aristotle says in his Ethics, an unfair person, we said, takes an unequal share. And unfair means unequal. So there's obviously also a midpoint here, i.e. a midpoint of the range unequal to x, and that the midpoint is equal to x. Because in any sort of action where you can get more than someone or less, you can also get an equal amount. So that kind of works out. Something like that right there. So if an unfair share is an unequal share, then a fair share is an equal share, exactly as everyone feels is the case without even having to think about it. Surprisingly, not everybody. And since equality is a midpoint, it follows that what's fair is also a midpoint. And equality implies equality of at least two variables. So if what's fair has to be both a midpoint and a kind of equality, then A, as a midpoint, it has to lie between something and something, i.e. between getting too much and getting too little. And B, as a kind of equality, it has to be the equality of two shares, C and D. And C, considered as fair, it has to be fair for two people, A and B. So for something to be fair, you need at least four variables. Two people for whom it's fair. Welcome to the park. We're right next to the street. And two shares over which it's fair. Of course, the equality of the shares will have to be the same as the equality of the people. That's to say, the shares have to stand in the same relation to each other as the people do. That means if the people involved aren't equals, it won't be fair for them to get equal shares. That's exactly what causes all the bickering and the recriminations. It's either when equals don't get equal shares or when people who aren't equals are awarded equal shares. That's also clear from what we deserve. Everyone agrees that fairness in distributions has to be based in some sense or other on what people deserve, but they disagree about what makes one person deserve the same as the next. Democrats say it's merely not being a slave. Oligarchs say wealth, and sometimes pedigree, and people who support aristocracy, or rule by the better class say moral worth. In other words, a fair share is in some sense proportional. Proportion isn't just a property of numbers in the abstract. It applies to anything that can be quantified at all. Proportionality means equality of two ratios, and so needs at least four variables. In a case where there's no overlapping term, i.e. A is to B as C is to D, it's easy to see the four variables. But even with an overlap, there are still four variables, because one of them serves as two. You say it twice, e.g. A is to B as B is to C. There, we said B twice. So long as you put down the B twice, you get four proportional variables. And that's like fairness. Fairness also needs a minimum of four variables, and it too has ratios that are the same, in the sense that the shares are divided into a ratio that matches the gap between the persons. So that means, for example, that A will be to B as C is to D, and conversely, A will be to C as B is to D. And consequently, the whole A getting C matches the whole B getting D. The whole being the coupling brought about by the distribution. And when they're put together the way the couplings are fair, in other words, the joining of A with C and B with D makes a fair distribution. And what's fair here is also a midpoint, because the proportional share is a midpoint, and the fair share, the proportional one, and an unfair distribution is one that breaks that proportionality. Mathematicians call this kind of proportionality geometrical, because it's something you find in geometry, where one whole figure stands in relation to another whole figure, as each part of it to each part of the other. But in the case of fairness, the proportionality can't have overlapping terms, i.e., can't be of the form A is to B as B is to C, because a person and a share can't be one in the same term. So that's what fair means in this context, proportional. And unfair means out of proportion, meaning that one of the shares is too big and one of them too small. And that's just what happens in actual cases of unfairness. The person who's being unfair gets too much of some sort of good, and the person who's being treated unfairly gets too little of it. Or the reverse, if it's something bad. Because a smaller share of something bad, relative to a larger one, counts as good. The smaller share of something bad is more desirable than the larger one. Desirable implies good, and if X is more desirable, X is a greater good. So that's one kind of fairness. Wow. Oh. Yeah, there you go. That's Aristotle on fairness. You got to break down what you're trying to be fair about and meet in the middle, I guess, is the gimmick. It's really more or less the archetype blueprint of it. So unless you break it down into unique situations, like they have one here. So A is a builder who worked 10 days. B is a builder who worked 1 day. So then C, which is the time of builder A, C is the pay of builder A, gets $50. D, the pay of builder B, gets $5. Translator's example, fair pay, when 10 to 1 equals 50 to 5, and 1050 equals 1.5, A getting 50 matches B getting 5. So you have to identify your two polars and then come to a middle from there to where both sides are equal. But first, to get there, you have to determine how they equalize the two sides, because no two sides are ever equal, or else they would be the same side. So we have to figure out why they're different, and this is a puzzle. It's trying to figure out why exactly everyone thinks there's multiple sides to certain things when there's a uniform archetype of nature's functions that make everything happen. But that's what we're here to learn. Philosophy at the Park on the subject of choice. Now that we've sorted out what it means to do something willingly and willfully or unwillingly, the next thing to do is explain the concept of choice. Making choices is absolutely essential to being a good person. And our choices are a more reliable indicator of our character than our actions. Alright, so choosing to do something implies doing it willfully, but not vice versa. Willing and willful is broader. Children and non-human animals can certainly do things willingly and willfully, but they aren't capable of making choices. Also, we regard snap reactions as willful, but we don't say people choose them. Some people say, A, that choice is desire, or B, that it's an impulse of spirit, or C, that choosing is wanting, or D, that a choice is a sort of belief. Here's why none of these ideas seem to be right. A. It can't just be desire. Non-reasoning animals aren't capable of making choices, but they are capable of desire and fighting spirit. Plus, if you lack self-control, you do things out of physical desire, but without choosing to. And conversely, in exercising self-control, you're choosing to act against your desire. Plus, you can desire the opposite of what you choose, but you can't desire the opposite of what you desire. Plus, desire targets what's pleasurable or painful, but choice doesn't target pain or pleasure. B. As for it being a spirited impulse, that's even less plausible. Spirited actions seem to be very least based on choice. C. But then choosing certainly isn't just wanting either, although they certainly feel very similar. For one thing, you don't choose things that are impossible. If you claim to be choosing impossible things, people would think you were a half-wit. But you can certainly want things that are impossible. You can want eternal life, for instance. Plus, you can want things that you couldn't possibly bring about through your own actions, e.g., you can want some actor or athlete to win, but nobody chooses things like that. You only choose things you think is in your power to make happen. Plus, we're more likely to want the thing that's our goal, and then choose the things that will get us to our goal. E.g., we want to be healthy, and we choose the things that make us healthy. And we want to flourish and be blessed, and we say, we're blessed. But it sounds a bit weird to say, I choose to be blessed, because there's a general sense that choice is about things that are in our power. D. It doesn't seem to be just a belief either. A belief can be about anything at all. We can just as easily have beliefs about eternal, unchanging facts or things that are impossible as about things that are up to us. Plus, we classify beliefs as true or false, not good or bad. The more usual way of classifying a choice. No doubt, nobody claims that choice is just the same thing as belief in general, but it isn't even the same as a certain sort of belief. Namely, as some people say, the belief that X is good. Choosing good or bad things makes us the kind of people we are. Merely having beliefs about them doesn't. Plus, we choose to get or to avoid good and bad things, whereas we have beliefs about what they are, who they're good for, or how. Our beliefs certainly aren't to get them or to avoid them. Plus, we normally praise a choice if someone chooses what they should, or for being the right choice. But we praise a belief for being true. Plus, it's very typical to choose things we know are good. But if we believe that X is good, we certainly don't know that X is good. Plus, people who make the best choices don't seem to be the same as the ones who have the best beliefs about what's good and bad. Some people seem to have better beliefs, but then choose the wrong thing because they're bad people. And even if a belief always precedes any choice or is implied by it, so what? That's not the claim we're considering here. We're asking if a choice is the same thing as some kind of belief. So what is it then? What does it involve? If it's none of the above, so what is it then? What does it involve if it's none of the above? Well, what we choose to do, we certainly do willingly. But not all the things we do willingly are the things we also choose. Goddamn right. So could it be that it's just the ones we've deliberated over beforehand? Yes, because choosing implies reasoning and thinking. And even the word in Greek seems to hint at deliberation. I'm not even going to try, but it means to choose. Implies taking A over B. Do people deliberate about everything? Can you deliberate about anything at all? Or are there some things where deliberating doesn't apply? And we should probably say that what you can deliberate about doesn't mean whatever the some halfwit or madman might deliberate about. Let's say it means something you could sanely deliberate about. So nobody deliberates over eternal and changing facts, like the nature of the cosmos or the fact that the square root of 2 is an irrational number, or things that are in motion but occur with perfect regularity by necessity or maybe by their nature or for some other reason, like the turning of the seasons or the rising of the stars, or things that happen unpredictably, like droughts or rainfall, or things that are just a matter of luck, like finding buried treasure. And we don't deliberate about all human matters either, e.g., no Spartan ever deliberates over what would be the best form of government in Scythia. The point is, none of these can be brought about through our own agency. We deliberate about things that are up to us and that are doable. Those are still left. Because the causes of things are A, nature, B, necessity, and C, chance, but also D, mind and every kind of human agency, and each group of human beings deliberates about the things that they can do. With precise, self-contained forms of knowledge, like knowing how to write, there's no place for deliberation. We're never in two minds about how to write an A. We only deliberate about what things that happen through our agency, but that don't always turn out the same way. Like things we do in medicine or business. And piloting a ship, say, involves more deliberating than athletic training does. To the extent that its rules are less precisely honed, and the same applies generally, and skills involve more deliberation than sciences, because with skills we're more likely to be in two minds about what to do. Goddamn right. Deliberating takes place with things that usually happen a certain way, but where it's unclear how they'll turn out this time. Or there's a bit of indeterminacy. We get other people to help us deliberate, advise us on big things because we don't trust ourselves to make the right decision on our own. We don't deliberate about our goals. We only deliberate about the things that will get us to our goals. A doctor doesn't ask, should I cure the patient? Or an orator, should I try to persuade my audience? Or a statesman, should I bring about law and order? In general, nobody deliberates about their goal. No, they take their goal as set and think about how to bring it about, i.e., by what steps. And if it seems like there are several possible ways of making it happen, the question then becomes, which would be the best way or the easiest? If their goal, A, can only be achieved through one thing, B, they then consider how to make A happen through B, i.e., what's the C that will make B happen, and so on, until they come to a starting point in the chain of causation, which is the end point in finding the answer. Because when you're deliberating, it's like you're working something out. You're working backwards through a problem, the way I've just described, rather like working back through a proof in geometry. Working something out doesn't always imply deliberating. It doesn't in mathematics, for instance, but deliberating always implies working something out. And the end point in working back through the problem is then the first step in making the thing happen. So if we come up against an impossible first step, we give up the whole idea. If we need money, say, there's no simple way of getting any. But if it seems possible, we set about doing it. And by possible here, we mean things that can be brought about through us or through our friends. Because that is through us, in a sense, because we initiate our friends' actions. We initiate our friends' actions. Sometimes we're trying to figure out what tools we need, sometimes how to use them. Likewise, in general, sometimes the question is, what X will make this happen? And sometimes it's, how do we make X happen? Or, who's going to do X? So to recap, A, human beings, we've said, are a cause. They cause their own actions. And B, we deliberate about the things that we can do. And C, our actions are always for the sake of some other thing. Because it isn't our goal that we deliberate about, just the things that get us to our goals. You don't deliberate about particulars either. Like, is this bread or is it cooked? That's the job of perception. If you deliberate every level, you go on forever. You deliberate about and choose the very same set of things, except that something you choose has got as far as being decided on. That's to say, what you choose is what you've approved after deliberating over it. There's a point where figuring out how you're going to do something stops, namely when you've traced the initiating of it back to yourself, and in particular to the part of you that's in charge. That's the part that does the choosing. That's illustrated by those older forms of government and the ones that Homer described. I gotta read Homer. Fuck. Where the chieftains would announce their choices to the rank and file. Something we choose is a thing we deliberate about, and B, a thing we desire to do, and C, in the class of things that are up to us. So it seems that overall a choice is a deliberation-based desire to X, where X is something that's up to us. As a result of deliberating, we've approved X and now desire to X in line with our deliberation. So that will do as our outline of what choice is and what kinds of things we choose, namely the things that get us to our goals. Let's move on.